Marcus Kane adjusted his plasma rifle as the transport ship shuddered through another meteor shower. The Terran Federation had sent their best soldiers to this forgotten corner of the galaxy, but none of them expected what they would find on Nyx Prime. The planet appeared dead from orbit, its surface scarred by ancient battles and covered in perpetual twilight. Readings show massive energy signatures beneath the surface, reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen, studying her scanner with a frown. Something big is down there, Captain. Captain Kane nodded grimly. Intelligence had been sparse about this mission. All they knew was that a distress beacon had been detected from this system, broadcasting on an old diplomatic frequency. The message was simple but urgent, a request for humanitarian aid from what claimed to be the last surviving member of the Nyx royal family. The landing was rough. Nyx Prime's atmosphere was thick with dust and electromagnetic interference. Their ship touched down in what had once been a grand plaza, now cracked and overgrown with strange, luminescent vegetation. Ancient spires reached toward the dark sky, their surfaces covered in symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "Stay alert," Kane ordered his squad of 12 Marines. "We don't know what we're walking into." They followed the beacon's signal through winding corridors carved from black stone. The architecture was unlike anything in the Federation databases. Graceful arches supported by impossibly thin pillars created spaces that felt both grand and intimate. Bioluminescent moss provided the only light, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. "Sir," whispered Corporal Davis, "these walls, they're covered in what looks like scratch marks." "Deep ones." Kane examined the gouges in the stone. They were too large and too precise to be random damage. Something with claws had been here, and recently. The scratch marks led deeper into the complex, following the same path as their beacon. The temperature dropped noticeably as they descended. Their breath began to mist, and frost formed on their weapons despite the atmospheric processors in their suits. Kane's experience in dozens of hostile environments told him this wasn't natural cold. Something was drawing heat from the air itself. They emerged into a vast chamber that took their breath away. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by columns that seemed to be carved from single pieces of midnight black crystal. In the center of the room stood an ornate throne made from the same dark material, and upon it sat a figure that made Kane's squad instinctively raise their weapons. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost painful to look at directly. Her skin was pale as moonlight, with an otherworldly luminescence that made the chamber's shadows dance around her. Long silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face with features so perfect they seemed carved by a master sculptor. But it was her eyes that held Kane's attention. They glowed with an inner fire that spoke of ancient intelligence and barely contained power. More concerning were the clear signs of her deteriorating condition. Her breathing was labored, and dark veins were visible beneath her translucent skin. The ornate dress she wore hung loose on her frame, as if she had recently lost significant weight. Most alarming of all, the very air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy that sparked and crackled unpredictably. "Lower your weapons," Kane commanded quietly. His soldiers hesitated, but obeyed. "You sent the distress beacon?" The figure on the throne lifted her head with obvious effort. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent unlike anything in Federation space, melodic but tinged with exhaustion. "I am Princess Lyralii of the House of Nyx. Last daughter of a dying realm." She paused, studying Kane with those luminous eyes. "You are human, yes?" "I had heard tales of your kind, but never thought to see one in person." "Captain Marcus Kane, Terran Federation Marines," he replied formally. "We received your request for humanitarian assistance. What do you need?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "What I need, Captain Kane, is something your people consider abhorrent. I am what you would call a vampire, though that term carries unfortunate connotations. My people were energy feeders, sustaining ourselves on the life force of willing donors. But my donors are all dead, killed in a war that ended centuries ago." Kane felt his squad tense behind him, but he held up a hand to keep them calm. "You're dying because you can't feed?" Slowly and painfully, Lyralii confirmed. "I sent the beacon hoping that some spacefaring race might have knowledge of alternatives, ways to synthesize what I need. I did not expect humans to answer." She leaned forward slightly. "Though perhaps that is fitting. I have heard that humans are uniquely generous among the galactic species. What exactly do you feed on?" Kane asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Life energy, transmitted through blood, she said simply. Not much is needed from a willing donor, and the process causes no permanent harm. But it must be freely given, or it provides no sustenance. My people built our entire civilization around this principle. We were guardians and protectors, not predators. Kane studied her carefully. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, but his scanner readings confirmed she was telling the truth about her condition. More importantly, something about her bearing and the obvious pain she was in convinced him of her sincerity. "What happened to your people?" he asked. Lyreliai's expression grew distant. The void touched came from the space between stars. They consumed everything in their path, converting matter to dark energy. My people fought them for 300 years, but we were too few and they were too many. In the end, I was sealed in stasis to preserve the bloodline, while the last of my kind made a final stand. She gestured weakly at the chamber around them. This is all that remains of a civilization that once spanned 17 star systems. These chambers are shielded by quantum barriers that the void touched could not breach, but they also prevent me from leaving. Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The void touched, are they still out there? Unknown. The barriers prevent any communication with the outside universe. For all I know, they consumed everything and moved on to the next galaxy. Or perhaps other races found ways to stop them. Her gaze sharpened. You are still alive, so they did not take everything. Lieutenant Chen stepped forward. Captain, our medical scanners confirm her biological readings are consistent with severe nutritional deficiency. Whatever her species needs to survive, she's not getting it. Kane made a decision that would change everything. What would you need from a willing donor? Lyrelii straightened in surprise. You would consider this? Despite what I am. You asked for humanitarian aid, Kane replied simply. That's what we do. How much do you need? A small amount of blood, perhaps 50 milliliters, while maintaining physical contact to transfer the life energy. The donor experiences mild fatigue for a few hours, nothing more. But, Captain, there are risks you do not understand. Such as? Lyreliai's expression became grave. The feeding creates a temporary bond between donor and receiver. Your thoughts and emotions would be partially shared with me during the process. More importantly, my people's biology includes protective mechanisms. Once a bond is formed, I would be compelled to protect you from any threat, even at the cost of my own existence. Kane considered this. That doesn't sound like a problem. You do not understand, Lyrelii said urgently. The bond does not simply end when the feeding is complete. It fades gradually over time, but, until it does, I would be able to sense your emotional state, your general health, even your approximate location if you were in danger. And, you would sense echoes of the same from me. For how long? For my people, usually several weeks. But, humans are different from our usual donors. Your life energy is more potent, more complex. The bond could last much longer, perhaps months or even years. Kane looked back at his squad. They were watching him with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed horror. He understood their reaction. Making himself vulnerable to an alien predator went against every survival instinct. But, he also understood duty. This was a sapient being asking for help, and the Terran Federation had built its reputation on providing aid to those who needed it. More than that, something about Princess Lyreliai's situation resonated with him on a personal level. She was the last of her kind, carrying the weight of an entire civilization's legacy while slowly dying alone. I volunteer, he said simply. Captain. Lieutenant Chun protested. We should report back to command, get medical clearance, maybe bring in xenobiology specialists. She doesn't have time for that, Kane replied, studying Lyreliai's deteriorating condition. Look at her. How long do you think she has left? Lyrelii answered quietly. Perhaps a week, maybe 2. The quantum barriers that protect these chambers also prevent me from entering true stasis again. I am trapped between life and death. Kane stepped closer to the throne. What do I need to do? Lyrelii stared at him in amazement. You truly mean this? You would risk forming a bond with someone you just met, someone whose very nature your people would consider monstrous? You're not a monster, Kane said firmly. You're someone who needs help. That's enough for me. For a moment, Lyreliai's composed facade cracked, and Kane saw tears glittering in those luminous eyes. It has been so long since anyone showed me kindness without expecting something in return. She stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. Even weakened, she moved with a predatory grace that spoke of hidden strength. The process is simple. I need skin contact with your wrist or neck to monitor your vital signs and ensure your safety. The actual feeding requires only a small incision. Kane removed his gauntlet and extended his arm. Do it. Lyreliai hesitated. Once this begins, there is no stopping until it is complete. Are you certain? I'm certain. She took his hand in both of hers, and Kane immediately felt a strange tingling sensation. Her skin was cold but somehow comforting, and he could sense an electric current passing between them. Lyreliai closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I can already feel your life energy, she whispered in wonder. It is unlike anything I have ever encountered. So vibrant, so complex. Your emotions are incredibly intense. She opened her eyes and looked at him with something approaching awe. How do humans contain such powerful feelings without being overwhelmed? Kane felt something shifting in his mind, as if someone had opened a door he didn't know existed. Suddenly, he could sense Lyreliai's emotions as clearly as his own. Her wonder and gratitude were mixed with centuries of loneliness and grief, but underneath it all was a core of strength that had kept her alive through unimaginable hardship. I feel it too, he said softly. The connection. Lyreliai nodded. It is stronger than I expected. Your species has remarkable capacity for emotional bonding. She lifted his wrist to her lips. This may sting briefly. Kane barely felt the small puncture. What he did feel was a warm sensation spreading up his arm as Lyreliai began to feed. But, instead of weakness, he felt a strange sense of completion, as if he had been missing something important his entire life and had finally found it. Through their shared connection, he experienced flashes of Lyreliai's memories. He saw Nyx Prime in its glory days, with crystal spires reaching toward twin suns and graceful beings moving through gardens that glowed with bioluminescent beauty. He felt her terror and determination during the war with the Void Touched, and her agonizing grief as she watched her world die. But he also felt her wonder at encountering humanity. Through her perception, he saw how unique humans were among galactic species. Their emotional intensity, their capacity for selfless sacrifice, their ability to find hope in impossible situations. These were traits that most aliens found baffling or even frightening, but, to Lyreliai they were beautiful. The feeding lasted only minutes, but, when it ended, both Kane and Lyreliai were changed. She straightened with obvious renewed strength, the dark veins fading from her skin and the dangerous energy fluctuations stabilizing. Kane felt mildly tired but also strangely energized, as if he had given away something precious and received something equally valuable in return. It is done, Lyreliai said, though she made no move to release his hand. The bond is formed. I can sense your life force as clearly as my own. Kane nodded, acutely aware that he could feel her emotions as a constant background presence in his mind. It wasn't intrusive or uncomfortable, more like having a quiet conversation with someone in the next room. How do you feel? Stronger than I have in decades, she replied with a smile that transformed her entire face. Your life energy is remarkably potent. This single feeding has restored perhaps a month of my strength. That's good news, Kane said. But we need to figure out a long-term solution. I can't stay here indefinitely, and you can't survive on just one feeding. Lyreliai's expression grew troubled. There lies the complication I feared to mention. The bond we have formed, it includes protective compulsions that I cannot override. If you attempt to leave while the bond remains active, my instincts will compel me to follow you, even if it means leaving the safety of these chambers. Kane felt a chill of understanding. And, outside the barriers, you'd be vulnerable to whatever killed your people. Yes. But, the alternative is equally problematic. If I remain here and you depart, the bond will cause me significant distress. I would be driven to reach you, but unable to leave the barriers. The psychological trauma could be severe enough to cause permanent damage. Lieutenant Chen, who had been listening with growing alarm, stepped forward. Captain, this sounds like we have a hostage situation. No, Kane said firmly, surprising everyone including himself with his certainty. She didn't choose this any more than I did. It's her biology, not a conscious decision. Through their bond, he felt Lyreliai's gratitude for his understanding, mixed with shame at her species' evolutionary traits. She had not wanted to trap him, but her nature left her no choice in the matter. There may be alternatives, Lyreliai said carefully. The Royal Archives contain extensive information about my people's biology and abilities. Perhaps there are ways to safely modify or control the bond effects. But accessing those archives would require me to leave the throne room, and I do not know if the barriers extend that far. Cain made another decision that would reshape both their destinies. Then, we'll find out together. My squad can provide security while we explore your archives. Captain, Chen protested again, command needs to know about this situation. They will, Cain assured her. But, not until we understand what we're dealing with. Princess Lyreliai has been alone for centuries. The least we can do is help her access her own people's knowledge. As if to emphasize his point, Cain felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude through their bond. Lyreliai had expected to die alone and forgotten. Instead, she had found someone willing to share her burden and help her search for solutions. Very well, Cain announced to his squad. We're extending our mission parameters. Princess Lyreliai is now under Terran Federation protection as a refugee and the last representative of her species. We'll escort her to the archives and provide security while she researches ways to address our current situation. Several of his Marines looked uncomfortable, but none voiced objections. Cain's reputation for making unconventional but ultimately successful decisions had earned their trust over many missions. Lyreliai rose from her throne with renewed strength and grace. I must warn you, the path to the archives leads through sections of the complex that may not be fully stable. The war damaged many of our quantum barriers, and some areas experienced temporal fluctuations or reality distortions. We've dealt with worse, Cain replied confidently. Lead the way, Your Highness. As they prepared to leave the throne room, Cain reflected on how drastically his mission parameters had changed. He had come to provide humanitarian aid to a distress beacon. Instead, he had formed an unprecedented bond with an alien princess and committed himself to helping preserve the last remnants of a dead civilization. Through their shared connection, he felt Lyreliai's mix of hope and apprehension. She was grateful beyond words for his help, but terrified of what they might discover in the archives. Some knowledge, she knew, could be more dangerous than ignorance. Cain simply focused on moving forward. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That was what the bond meant, and, despite its unexpected nature, he found himself oddly comfortable with that reality. The first step of their journey together was about to begin. The corridors beyond the throne room revealed the true scope of Nyx Prime's former glory. Massive halls stretched in impossible directions, their walls covered in murals that seemed to move when observed peripherally. Cain's squad moved in tight formation, their scanners detecting energy fluctuations that defied conventional physics. These readings are off the charts, reported Sergeant Mills, studying his equipment with a frown. It's like reality itself is unstable here. Princess Lyreliai moved ahead with renewed confidence, her earlier weakness completely gone. Cain could feel her emotions through their bond, a mixture of nostalgia and determination as she navigated passages she had not walked in centuries. The temporal distortions began during the final battle, she explained, her voice echoing strangely in the vast spaces. My people attempted to weaponize time itself against the void touched. The experiment was partially successful but left permanent scars in the fabric of reality. They passed through a chamber where gravity seemed to flow in spirals, forcing the Marines to use magnetic anchors to maintain their footing. In another room, Cain watched in fascination as his reflection in a crystal wall showed him as a child, then an elderly man, then himself again. Don't stare too long at the temporal mirrors, Lyreliai warned. Some visitors have become lost in viewing their alternate timelines. Cain pulled his gaze away reluctantly. Through their bond, he sensed that Lyreliai had spent countless hours staring into those mirrors during her long isolation, watching potential versions of herself where her people had survived. The archives lay behind doors that defied description. They appeared to be carved from solidified light, pulsing with colors that had no names in any human language. Lyreliai placed her palm against the surface, and complex symbols flowed across the door like living text. Biometric locks key to the royal bloodline, she explained as the doors dissolved into motes of light. Only I can access the deepest archives now. The chamber beyond took Cain's breath away. It was simultaneously vast and intimate, stretching impossibly far in all directions while somehow feeling cozy and enclosed. Information existed here in forms that challenged human perception. Some knowledge floated as glowing spheres of light, others as crystalline structures that sang with harmonious tones, and still others as streams of pure thought that could be felt rather than seen.
How do you navigate all this?
Kane asked, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information surrounding them. The archives respond to focused intent, Lyralii replied, extending her consciousness toward a cluster of amber-colored dataspheres. I seek knowledge about the feeding bond between my people and other species. The chamber responded immediately. Streams of light converged around them, forming a cocoon of swirling information. Kane felt knowledge flowing directly into his mind through their shared connection, not overwhelming, but precise and targeted. He learned that Lyralii's people, the Nixari, had evolved as symbiotic energy feeders. Unlike the vampires of human mythology, they had never been parasites. Their entire civilization was built around consensual energy exchange that benefited both parties. Donors received enhanced healing, extended lifespans, and heightened physical abilities in exchange for regular energy contributions. More importantly, he discovered that the feeding bonds served a crucial evolutionary purpose. They allowed the Nixari to form deep empathic connections with other species, making them naturally gifted diplomats and peacemakers. Their empire had been a confederation of dozens of species working together through these bonds. Your people were galactic peacekeepers, Kane realized aloud. For over 10,000 years, Lyralii confirmed with pride. We prevented 17 interstellar wars through empathic mediation alone. The void touch targeted us specifically because our abilities made their species-consuming tactics ineffective. The data stream shifted, showing Kane more troubling information. The feeding bonds were designed to be mutual and temporary with most species, but humans were proving to be a unique case.
Human life energy was incredibly potent due to their species' unusual emotional intensity and adaptability. More concerning, human neural patterns seemed naturally compatible with Nixari bond structures in ways that other species were not. What does that mean for us? Kane asked, though he suspected he already knew.
Lyralii's emotions through their bond became complex, gratitude mixed with guilt and growing concern. It means our bond will be stronger and longer lasting than normal. Possibly permanent unless we take active steps to sever it. And severing it would be dangerous for you? Potentially fatal, she admitted quietly. Human life energy appears to be uniquely nourishing for my species. Having tasted it, my biology will crave it specifically.
Forcing separation could trigger a degenerative cascade that my weakened system cannot survive.
Kane absorbed this information with surprising calm. Through their bond, he could feel that Lyralii was being completely honest, despite her obvious anguish at the implications. She truly had not known that humans would be different from her people's historical donors.
What about alternatives, he asked. Ways to make the bond more manageable or to find substitute energy sources?
The archives responded to this query by highlighting a series of crystalline data structures.
As Lyralii accessed them, Kane felt new information flowing through their connection.
There were theoretical possibilities, synthetic energy sources that could sustain a Nixari indefinitely, or bond modification techniques that could reduce the intensity of the connection while maintaining its life-sustaining properties. But all of these solutions required advanced technology and resources that no longer existed. The synthesis equipment would need quantum fabricators of a type that only the Nixari had possessed. The bond modification techniques required other Nixari to perform them safely. Dead ends, Kane muttered, feeling Lyralii's disappointment echo his own. Not necessarily, she said, her excitement suddenly spiking through their bond. There is another option I had not considered. New data streams emerged, showing information about emergency protocols developed during the war with the Void Touched. Kane watched in fascination as the archives revealed plans for mobile command centers, ships designed to carry Nixari technology and personnel into deep space. Several evacuation fleets were launched during the final stages of the war, Lyralii explained rapidly. They carried refugees and complete technological databases to predetermined rally points in uninhabited systems. If even one fleet survived, they would have the resources we need.
How many fleets? Kane asked.
12, each containing between 50 and 100,000 refugees. They were designed to remain hidden until it was safe to re-establish contact with the homeworld. Her emotions through the bond became a mixture of desperate hope and fear.
I have the location codes for all 12 rally points.
Kane felt his own excitement rising.
We can check those coordinates, see if any of them are still active.
But, to do so, I would need to leave the protection of these barriers, Lyralii pointed out. And, according to this information, the bond between us would make separation extremely difficult regardless. Lieutenant Chen, who had been quietly observing their interaction, stepped forward. Captain, I hate to interrupt, but we've been here for 6 hours.
Command will be expecting a status report soon.
Kane nodded, his mind racing through possibilities.
What if we brought Princess Lyralii back to Federation space?
Our medical facilities might be able to help stabilize her condition while we search for her people's survivor fleets. Through their bond, he felt Lyralii's immediate terror at the suggestion. I have never left Nyx Prime, she said aloud. My people designed these barriers to protect me from the void touched, but they also prevented me from developing resistance to foreign environments or pathogens. Leaving this world could kill me even if no enemies remain. The archives responded to her fear by displaying medical data about Nyxery physiology. Kane learned that his bond partner's species had incredibly sensitive immune systems that required gradual adaptation to new environments. Sudden exposure to foreign bacteria, viruses, or even atmospheric variations could trigger potentially fatal autoimmune responses. So we need to find a way to gradually adapt you to travel, Kane mused. Or find a way to bring the medical assistance here.
There is a third option, Lyralii said hesitantly.
The emergency protocols include procedures for deep bonding. Kane felt her embarrassment and anxiety spike as she accessed this information. The data that flowed through their connection made his breath catch.
Deep bonding was a process where a Nyxery formed a permanent, unbreakable connection with a compatible donor.
The bond would allow the Nyxery to share their partner's immunities and environmental adaptations while providing the donor with enhanced physical capabilities and extended lifespan. But it came with a cost.
Both partners would be permanently linked on an emotional and physical level.
They would share not just feelings, but memories, thoughts, and even dreams. Separation would become impossible if one died, the other would follow within hours. That seems extreme, Kane said carefully.
It is, Lyralii agreed. Deep bonding was reserved for wartime emergencies or when a Nyxery was the last of their line.
It was considered a marriage of sorts, a commitment that transcended individual existence.
Kane studied the implications through the data flowing between them. A deep bond would solve their immediate problems. It would allow Lyralii to survive in Federation space while they searched for her people's survivor fleets. But it would also tie them together for the rest of their lives.
What would happen to me, he asked.
Physically and mentally? The archives provided detailed information about the effects on the human partner. Enhanced strength, speed, and reflexes.
Improved healing and disease resistance. Extended lifespan, potentially doubling or tripling normal human longevity. Enhanced intuition and emotional intelligence through shared consciousness. But also permanent changes to brain chemistry and neural structure.
The human partner would develop empathic abilities that could be overwhelming without proper training.
They would become dependent on regular physical contact with their Nyxery bondmate for optimal mental health. It would make you more than human, but less than fully human, Lyralii explained sadly.
You would become something new, something unique. Neither fully your original species nor fully mine.
Kane considered this while feeling her emotional turmoil through their current bond. She desperately wanted to survive, to find her people and restore her civilization. But she genuinely cared about his welfare and was horrified at the idea of transforming him against his will.
What about consent, he asked. Could the deep bonding be reversed if we later found another solution?
No, Lyralii replied simply. It is permanent and irreversible.
The only way it ends is in death.
Kane looked around at his squad, all of whom were listening to this conversation with growing alarm. He knew what they were thinking, that he was being manipulated by an alien predator into sacrificing his humanity. And, perhaps they were right to be concerned. But, through the bond, he could feel Lyralii's genuine anguish. She was not manipulating him. If anything, she was trying to discourage him from making a sacrifice she considered too great to ask of anyone.
How long do I have to decide? Kane asked. Our current bond will sustain me for perhaps 2 weeks, Lyralii replied. After that, I will need another feeding or other arrangements. And if I simply continue providing regular feedings without deep bonding?
The archives showed him projections that made his stomach turn. Regular feedings would work temporarily, but his life energy would become increasingly depleted over time.
Within 6 months, the cumulative drain would likely prove fatal despite the bond's protective mechanisms.
So my choices are deep bonding, finding your survivor fleets quickly, or dying slowly, Kane summarized grimly.
Those appear to be the options, Lyralii confirmed with profound sadness. I am sorry, Captain Kane. I never intended to trap you in such circumstances.
Kane felt her genuine remorse and self-recrimination through their bond. She was prepared to let herself die rather than force him into deep bonding against his will. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This alien princess, the last of her kind, was willing to sacrifice herself rather than harm him.
Let me think about this, he said finally. And let me discuss it with my team. Lyralii nodded gracefully.
Of course. This decision affects not just us, but your entire species' relationship with mine.
It should not be made hastily.
As they prepared to leave the archives, Kane noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Several of the data streams were flickering and fading, their light growing dim. The archives are degrading, Lyralii confirmed his observation with alarm. Without proper maintenance, the quantum matrices that store this information will collapse within a few months. Once that happens, 10,000 years of Nixery knowledge will be lost forever. Kane stared at the failing data streams, understanding the true scope of what was at stake.
It wasn't just Lyralii's life or even his own transformation.
They were potentially looking at the complete extinction of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, taking with them knowledge that could benefit countless other species. We need to get this information to Federation scientists, he said decisively.
Even if we can't save everything, we can preserve what's most important.
The archives are quantum encrypted, Lyralii replied.
They can only be accessed by someone with Nixery blood or someone bonded to a Nixery.
Without me, your people would never be able to decode any of it. Another layer of complexity added to their situation. Kane felt the weight of decision pressing down on him.
Whatever choice he made would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.
As they began the journey back to the throne room, Kane found himself studying Lyralii more carefully through their bond.
She was not just a vampire princess or an alien refugee.
She was a keeper of knowledge, a living repository of wisdom that had guided interstellar civilization for millennia. Her death would represent a loss comparable to the burning of the Library of Alexandria, but on a galactic scale. The responsibility was staggering. And, through their shared connection, Kane realized that Lyralii felt that weight every moment of every day. She was not just trying to survive, she was trying to preserve the legacy of her entire species for the benefit of races she had never met. When they reached the throne room, Kane turned to address his squad. I need to contact Command and explain our situation.
This has gone far beyond a simple humanitarian mission.
Sir, Lieutenant Chen said carefully, are you sure you're thinking clearly?
This bond she mentioned, could it be affecting your judgment? Kane considered the question seriously.
The bond did make him more sympathetic to Lyralii's plight and more willing to consider extreme solutions. But it also allowed him to sense her genuine emotions and motivations with perfect clarity. Maybe it is affecting my judgment, he admitted.
But not in the way you might think. It's helping me understand the real scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just about saving one individual, it's about preserving knowledge that could revolutionize how species interact across the galaxy.
As if to prove his point, Kane felt a sudden surge of gratitude from Lyralii. Not for his willingness to sacrifice himself, but for his recognition of what her people's legacy could mean to the wider universe. The decision that lay ahead would reshape not just their lives, but potentially the future of interstellar civilization itself. The communication with Federation Command proved more complicated than Kane had anticipated. Admiral Richardson's holographic image flickered with interference from the quantum barriers surrounding the Nixery complex, her expression growing increasingly concerned as Kane provided his detailed report. Let me understand this correctly, Captain, Admiral Richardson said slowly.
You formed a psychic bond with an alien vampire princess, and now you're considering permanent biological fusion to preserve a dead civilization's knowledge?
That's an oversimplification, but essentially accurate, Kane replied. He stood in the throne room while Lyralii waited nearby, her enhanced hearing allowing her to monitor every word despite the supposed privacy of the communication. Captain Kane, the Admiral continued, I need to know if you're making this decision of your own free will or if you're being influenced by this creature's abilities. Through their bond, Kane felt Lyralii flinch at the word creature, though she gave no outward sign of offense. Her centuries of isolation had made her sensitive to any hint of rejection or disgust. My judgment is my own, Kane stated firmly. The bond allows me to sense Princess Lyralii's emotions and intentions clearly. She's being completely honest about the risks and consequences. If anything, she's trying to discourage me from making the sacrifice. Nevertheless, I'm ordering you to return to the ship immediately for medical and psychological evaluation. We'll bring xenobiology specialists to study this situation properly. Kane felt Lyralii's spike of terror through their connection. Separation now, even temporarily, would cause her significant distress and potentially trigger the protective compulsions that could force her to leave the safety of the barriers. Admiral, I respectfully request permission to remain planetside while the specialists are en route, Kane said. Princess Lyralii's condition is more fragile than my initial report indicated. Premature separation could endanger her life. There was a long pause while Admiral Richardson consulted with advisors outside the transmission range. When she returned, her expression was grim. Captain, Command has serious concerns about your situation. We're dispatching the scientific vessel Prometheus with a full xenobiology team, but their ETA is 5 days minimum. Can you maintain safe conditions until then? Kane glanced at Lyralii, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Through their bond, he sensed her calculation. She could survive 5 days easily on the energy from their single feeding, but the psychological stress of knowing he might be forced to leave would be considerable. We can manage 5 days, Kane confirmed. But, Admiral, you need to understand the time pressure we're facing. The Nixery archives are degrading rapidly. Each day we delay means losing irreplaceable knowledge. That's unfortunate, but protecting Federation personnel takes priority over archaeological concerns. Kane felt a flash of anger that surprised him with its intensity. This isn't archaeology. The Nixery were advanced enough to fight an interdimensional enemy for 3 centuries. Their knowledge could revolutionize everything from medical treatment to space travel. Through their bond, he sensed Lyralii's gratitude for his defense of her people's legacy, mixed with sadness that even their magnificent achievements were reduced to mere historical curiosities by races that had never known them. Captain, Admiral Richardson said sternly, you're emotionally compromised. That much is clear from this conversation. You will remain planetside but take no further action regarding this bonding process until the specialists arrive. Is that understood? Understood, Kane replied reluctantly. The transmission ended, leaving Kane staring at the empty holographic projector. Behind him, he heard Lyralii approaching with those impossibly graceful movements that seemed to defy gravity. Your superiors do not trust me, she observed quietly. They don't understand you, Kane corrected. There's a difference. Through their bond, he felt her rueful amusement. In my experience, the result is often the same. She settled onto her throne with fluid elegance. They are right to be cautious, of course. What I am asking of you violates every principle of self-preservation your species possesses. Kane turned to face her fully. In the bioluminescent lighting of the throne room, she looked less alien and more like someone who needed help. What you're asking? I thought you were trying to talk me out of it. I am conflicted, Lyralii admitted. My rational mind tells me that sacrificing your humanity for my survival is unconscionable. But my instincts, my very nature, compels me to seek the bond that would ensure my continued existence. She gestured at the chamber around them. I have been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to share thoughts and emotions with another consciousness. Your bond has reminded me of what I am missing, what my people were meant to experience. The prospect of losing that connection again terrifies me more than death. Kane felt the truth of her words through their shared connection. Beneath her composed exterior, Lyralii was struggling with desperate loneliness that had accumulated over centuries of isolation. The brief taste of companionship their bond provided had awakened hunger she had forced herself to forget. You said there were 12 evacuation fleets, Kane said, settling into a more comfortable position. Tell me about them. Lyralii's eyes brightened with hope and longing. Through their bond, Kane felt her accessing memories that brought both joy and pain. The largest was the Star Weaver fleet, carrying the entire Royal Academy of Sciences along with their families, she began. If any fleet survived, it would be theirs. they had the most advanced ships and the most comprehensive technological databases. She closed her eyes, and Kane felt her consciousness reaching back across centuries to memories of the desperate final days of her civilization. Fleet Commander Thane was my cousin, brilliant and stubborn in equal measure. He refused to accept that the war was lost even when our homeworlds were falling. His fleet was supposed to establish a research colony in the Kepler Nebula, using the radiation fields to hide from the void touched while developing new weapons. Kane absorbed the information while simultaneously experiencing Lyraliai's emotional connection to these long-lost relatives. Through their bond, he could feel her certainty that if any Nixery had survived, Thane's fleet would have been among them. What about the other fleets? The Moonlight Sanctuary carried our greatest artists and cultural preservationists. Fleet Commander Serafina was determined to save our music, literature, and philosophical traditions even if our technology was lost. Lyraliai's expression grew distant. She was my sister, older by 50 years and infinitely more patient than I ever was. Kane felt a pang of sympathetic grief through their connection. Lyraliai had lost not just her civilization, but her entire family. Every person she had ever cared about was either dead or lost somewhere in the void of space. The smaller fleets carried specialized groups: engineers, medical researchers, agricultural specialists. Each was designed to be self-sufficient and capable of establishing a new colony if necessary. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Kane. But that was over 400 years ago. Even if they survived the immediate aftermath of the war, there's no guarantee they're still active. Only one way to find out, Kane replied. But your people's technology, can we search for them from here? Lyraliai shook her head regretfully. The quantum barriers that protect this complex also prevent any form of long-range communication or scanning. To search for the fleets, I would need to leave Nyx Prime entirely. Kane thought about their options. The Federation had the most advanced long-range sensors in known space, certainly capable of detecting Nixery energy signatures if they knew what to look for. But getting Lyraliai to Federation territory safely remained the crucial challenge. What if we didn't take you to Federation space directly? He asked. What if we found a way to conduct the search from somewhere closer, somewhere you could adapt to gradually? Through their bond, he felt Lyraliai's mind racing through possibilities. There are several uninhabited systems within a few light years of here. If I could adapt to the environment of one of them, it might be possible to extend the search range gradually. But you'd still need to leave the barriers, Kane pointed out. Yes. And that would require either the deep bonding to protect me from environmental shock or... She hesitated, her emotions becoming conflicted through their connection. Or what? There is another option. A less permanent one, but also less reliable. Lyraliai accessed information from the archives through their bond, sharing it directly with Kane's consciousness. Emergency adaptation protocols developed during the war. They involved multiple intermediate feedings over a short period to rapidly strengthen the bond temporarily. Kane studied the knowledge flowing through their connection. The process would require him to provide energy donations 3 times per day for a week, each session lasting longer than their initial feeding. By the end, their bond would be strong enough to provide Lyraliai with some of his environmental adaptations, but the intensity would be almost overwhelming for both participants. What are the risks? He asked. For me, minimal. For you. Lyraliai's concerns spiked through their bond. The cumulative energy drain could cause permanent fatigue, reduced lifespan, possible neurological damage. And the psychological effects of such an intense temporary bond are unpredictable. But it would allow you to leave Nyx Prime safely? Probably. The temporary enhanced bond should provide enough protection for me to survive in a controlled environment like a Federation starship. But, Captain, the process is designed to be performed by trained bonding specialists under medical supervision. Attempting it without proper safeguards could kill both of us. Kane considered their options. The emergency protocols were risky but potentially manageable. The deep bonding was safer but permanent. Waiting for Federation specialists might preserve his individual autonomy but could result in losing irreplaceable knowledge as the archives continued to degrade. How much knowledge would be lost if we wait 5 days for the specialists? He asked. Lyraliai consulted the archives again, her distress growing as she processed the data. Approximately 12% of the historical databases and 8% of the scientific archives. Including most of the cultural preservation files and nearly all of the artistic records. Kane felt her anguish as if it were his own. The Nixery had been more than just advanced scientists and diplomats, they had been poets, musicians, philosophers, and artists whose works had enriched dozens of species across the galaxy. Losing those cultural treasures would be like watching the universe become a little less beautiful.
What about my squad? Kane asked. Could they help with the emergency protocols? Possibly.
Human life energy appears to be uniquely compatible with Nixery physiology, but I don't know if the same applies to multiple donors simultaneously.
Lyralii accessed more archive data.
There are records of group bonding ceremonies, but always between a single Nixery and multiple donors of the same species.
Never with humans.
Kane looked around the throne room at his Marines, who were maintaining a respectful distance while monitoring their surroundings for threats. Lieutenant Chen caught his eye and approached when he gestured.
Chen, what's your honest assessment of our situation? He asked quietly. Honestly, sir?
I think we're in over our heads, she replied bluntly.
But I also think you're right about the importance of this discovery. The technology we've seen here could change everything for the Federation. Kane felt Lyralii's surprise through their bond.
She had expected his subordinates to be more resistant to the idea of cooperation.
What about the others? Chen glanced back at the squad.
Mixed opinions, but everyone trusts your judgment.
If you say this is important enough to take risks for, we'll follow your lead. Through their bond, Kane sensed Lyralii's growing amazement at the loyalty and trust displayed by his team.
In her experience, most species were far more individualistic and self-preserving than humans appeared to be. There's something else to consider, Kane said to both Chen and Lyralii. The princess mentioned that her people were targeted by the Void Touched specifically because of their diplomatic abilities. If these creatures are still out there, the Federation needs to know about them. Lyralii's alarm spiked through their connection. I had hoped that the Void Touched were confined to this region of space, but you are correct. If they survive the war and continue to spread, other civilizations could be at risk. Kane made his decision with characteristic directness.
We're not waiting for the specialists. Princess Lyralii, I want to attempt the emergency adaptation protocols starting tomorrow. Lieutenant Chen, prepare the squad for extended planetside operations.
Sir, Chen said carefully, Admiral Richardson's orders were explicit about taking no action until the specialists arrive. Admiral Richardson doesn't understand the full scope of what we're dealing with, Kane replied firmly.
Sometimes field commanders have to make decisions based on information command doesn't possess.
Through their bond, he felt Lyralii's mixture of gratitude, terror, and determination. She understood that he was risking his career and, possibly his life to help her, and the weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. Captain Kane, she said formally, I need you to understand that once we begin the emergency protocols, there will be no turning back. Even if the Federation specialists arrive early, the process cannot be safely interrupted.
Kane nodded grimly. I understand. And, Princess, I need you to understand that I'm not just doing this for you. The knowledge your people preserved could save countless lives across the galaxy.
That's worth the risk. As they began preparations for the emergency adaptation protocols, Kane reflected on how completely his life had changed in the span of 2 days. He had come to Nyx Prime as a soldier following orders. He was choosing to stay as something far more complicated, a bridge between species, a protector of knowledge, and, perhaps the key to preventing a galactic catastrophe. Through their bond, he felt Lyralii's deep gratitude and her fierce determination to prove worthy of his sacrifice.
Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The real test of their alliance was about to begin.
The emergency adaptation protocols began at dawn on the second day, though dawn on Nyx Prime was merely a lessening of the perpetual twilight that shrouded the planet. Kane had spent the night reviewing the archived procedures through his bond with Lyralii, preparing himself mentally for what was to come.
The process must be gradual, Lyralii explained as she prepared the ritual chamber adjacent to the throne room.
Ancient crystals pulsed with soft light, their harmonics creating an atmosphere conducive to energy transfer.
3 sessions daily, each progressively longer and deeper than the last.
Kane's squad maintained security positions around the chamber, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed alarm. Through their shared connection, Kane could feel Lyralii's nervousness about performing such an intimate procedure in front of witnesses. Your people are uncomfortable, she observed quietly. They're soldiers, Kane replied.
they'll adapt.
The first session was similar to their original feeding, but more intense and deliberate. As Lyralii drew energy through their physical connection, Kane felt the bond between them deepening and expanding. Her emotions became clearer, her thoughts more accessible. More unsettling, he began to experience flashes of her memories, glimpses of Nyx Prime in its glory, fragments of conversations with long-dead relatives, echoes of a civilization's final desperate moments. The memory sharing is normal, Lyralii assured him afterward, though her own discomfort was evident through their bond. As the connection strengthens, our consciousness will become increasingly integrated.
Kane nodded, though privately he was struggling with the implications.
The borrowed memories felt as real and vivid as his own experiences, creating a disorienting sense of living multiple lives simultaneously. The second session, conducted 6 hours later, proved significantly more challenging. The energy transfer process lasted nearly an hour, during which Kane experienced complete sensory fusion with Lyralii. He felt her enhanced awareness, her ability to perceive energy patterns invisible to human senses, her instinctive understanding of quantum fluctuations that permeated the ancient complex. But he also felt her overwhelming loneliness, centuries of isolation that had shaped her personality in ways that no social creature should have to endure. The weight of being the sole survivor of an entire civilization pressed down on him like a physical force. "How did you survive this?" he gasped when the session ended, referring to the emotional burden she carried constantly.
"Purpose," Lyralii replied simply. "The knowledge that I am the only remaining keeper of my people's legacy. That if I die, everything they accomplished dies with me."
By the third session that evening, the bond had strengthened to a degree that alarmed both participants. Kane's enhanced awareness allowed him to perceive the quantum barriers protecting the complex, to sense the approaching degradation of the archive systems, to feel the pulse of life energy flowing through every living thing in their vicinity. More importantly, Lyralii had begun to exhibit some of his environmental adaptations. Her respiratory system adjusted to handle atmospheric variations, her immune system strengthened against foreign pathogens, her nervous system adapted to process sensory input from unfamiliar environments. "It's working," she said with wonder, examining her own transformed physiology through instruments Kane couldn't have operated minutes earlier but now understood intuitively. "I can feel my body adapting to survive outside the barriers." The second day brought unexpected complications. Admiral Richardson contacted them again, her expression thunderous when she realized Kane had defied her direct orders. "Captain Kane, you are hereby relieved of command and ordered to report to the Prometheus immediately upon its arrival. Lieutenant Chen will assume field command until then."
Kane felt Lyralii's terror spike through their bond. Separation now would be devastating for both of them, possibly fatal for her.
"Admiral, the process cannot be safely interrupted," Kane explained calmly.
"Stopping the adaptation protocols at this point could kill Princess Lyralii and result in the complete loss of the Nyxery archives."
"That is no longer your concern, Captain. You are clearly being influenced by this creature's abilities and are no longer fit for command." Through their bond, Kane felt Lyralii's hurt at again being called a creature, but also her resignation. She had expected this reaction from his superiors. "Admiral," Kane said with conviction that surprised everyone including himself, "I am making a formal request for asylum consideration for Princess Lyralii under Federation humanitarian statutes. As the last member of her species and keeper of irreplaceable scientific knowledge, she qualifies for full protection and assistance."
There was a long silence before Admiral Richardson responded.
"Captain, you have exceeded your authority in ways that border on mutiny. The asylum request will be reviewed through proper channels, but, until then, you will follow orders." After the transmission ended, Kane found himself facing his squad's uncertain expressions.
Lieutenant Chen approached him cautiously.
"Sir, Admiral Richardson isn't wrong about exceeding authority," she said quietly.
"Are you certain you're thinking clearly?" Kane considered the question seriously.
The bond did influence his thought processes, making him more empathetic and emotionally aware than was typical for him.
But it also provided perfect insight into Lyralii's motivations and honesty.
"Chen, in your opinion, am I acting like someone being mind-controlled?" he asked. She studied his expression carefully.
"No, sir.
You're acting like someone who's seen something important that the rest of us haven't fully grasped yet."
Kane nodded gratefully. "The bond isn't controlling my mind, it's expanding it.
I can perceive the true scope of what's at stake here in ways that pure intellect couldn't achieve."
The adaptation protocols continued with increasing intensity.
By the fourth day, Kane and Lyraliai's consciousness had become so intertwined that they occasionally spoke in unison or completed each other's sentences. The psychological fusion was both exhilarating and terrifying. More importantly, the archives revealed that Kane's intuition about the void touched had been correct. The creatures were not confined to Nixery space, they were a universal threat that consumed civilizations across multiple galaxies. The Nixery databases contained crucial information about their weaknesses and behavioral patterns that could save countless lives. This information must reach the Federation, Kane insisted during a brief respite between sessions. If the void touched are still active, every species in known space could be at risk.
Lyraliai nodded weakly.
The adaptation process was draining for her as well, requiring her to constantly reshape her biology to accommodate foreign environmental factors.
The tactical databases show 17 different successful defense strategies developed by various species.
But accessing them requires deep archive penetration that only a fully bonded Nixery can perform. On the fifth day, just hours before the Prometheus was due to arrive, Kane made a discovery that changed everything. During their final adaptation session, his enhanced consciousness accessed a previously hidden section of the archive's emergency beacon logs from the evacuation fleets.
Lyraliai, he said urgently, I'm reading active beacon signals.
3 of the fleets are still broadcasting.
Her eyes widened with hope and disbelief. Impossible. The signals would be centuries old by now.
But the data was unmistakable. 3 of the 12 evacuation fleets were not only intact but actively maintaining their hidden positions. The Star Weaver fleet in the Kepler Nebula was thriving, having established a successful research colony. The Moonlight Sanctuary had founded an artistic commune in an uncharted star system. Most remarkably, a fleet called the Phoenix Wing had actually been growing, recruiting survivors from other species devastated by the void touched.
They're alive, Lyraliai whispered, tears streaming down her luminous face. My people survived.
Kane felt her overwhelming joy through their bond, but also her desperate longing to reach them. The enhanced connection had made her survival possible, but it had also created an unbreakable link between them that would affect any reunion with her people. When the Prometheus arrived, Captain Sarah Martinez immediately requested Kane's presence aboard ship. The scientific vessel carried a full xenobiology team along with a diplomatic corps specifically trained in first contact protocols. Captain Kane, Martinez said grimly when he materialized in the ship's transporter bay, you've created an unprecedented situation. Admiral Richardson wants you court-martialed, but the science division is calling this the most important discovery since first contact with the Vulcans.
Kane felt Lyraliai's anxiety through their bond.
She had accompanied him to the ship, her enhanced biology allowing her to survive in the artificial environment, but being surrounded by so many alien minds was overwhelming for someone who had been alone for centuries. Ma'am, Princess Lyraliai and I have discovered the locations of 3 surviving Nixery fleets, Kane reported formally. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence that the void touched represent a continuing threat to all galactic civilization.
Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission's lead xenobiologist, stepped forward with barely contained excitement.
Captain Kane, the energy readings we're detecting from your bond are unlike anything in our databases.
May we examine both of you?
Over the following hours, the scientific team conducted extensive scans and interviews. Their findings confirmed Kane's reports about the void touch threat and the survival of Nixery civilization, but they also raised serious concerns about the permanence of the adaptation bond. The neural integration is far more extensive than we initially understood, Dr. Vasquez explained to Captain Martinez.
Captain Kane's brain chemistry has been fundamentally altered. Separating him from Princess Lyraliai at this point would likely result in severe psychological trauma for both parties. Kane felt Lyraliai's guilt through their connection.
She blamed herself for the transformation, even though he had chosen it freely. Doctor, Kane interjected, the bond has given me capabilities I never possessed as a purely human soldier. Enhanced reflexes, improved pattern recognition, empathic awareness that makes me a better leader.
The changes aren't necessarily negative. Captain Martinez frowned.
Nevertheless, you're no longer fully human, Captain. The Federation will need to determine how to classify your status moving forward. The resolution came from an unexpected source.
Admiral Richardson, reviewing the complete mission reports and scientific findings, made a decision that surprised everyone.
Captain Kane, her holographic image announced, you are hereby assigned as permanent liaison between the Terran Federation and the surviving Nixery fleets. Your unique status makes you ideally suited for this role.
Kane felt Lyraliai's excitement through their bond.
The appointment would allow them to travel together to locate her people while serving Federation interests. Furthermore, the Admiral continued, Princess Lyraliai is granted full diplomatic immunity and Federation citizenship as the official representative of Nixery civilization. Your mission is to establish formal contact with the survivor fleets and assess their potential for alliance against the void-touched threat. 6 months later, Kane stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Starship Harmony, watching the Kepler Nebula grow larger in the viewports. Beside him, Lyraliai radiated excitement and nervousness through their permanent bond. They were hours away from reuniting her with her cousin Thane's fleet after 4 centuries of separation. The adaptation protocols had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Rather than the desperate emergency measure they had originally planned, their bond had become a genuine partnership that enhanced both their capabilities. Kane's human intuition and leadership skills complemented Lyraliai's vast knowledge and empathic abilities perfectly. More importantly, their success had opened new possibilities for interspecies cooperation. The Federation Science Council was already discussing similar bonding programs with other compatible species, potentially creating a new class of enhanced diplomats and explorers.
Are you nervous about seeing your cousin again?
Kane asked through their mental connection, a form of communication they had developed as their bond deepened.
Terrified, Lyraliai admitted. Thane knew me as a child, sheltered and naive. Now I am something different, neither fully Nixery nor fully myself.
Kane sensed her deeper concern that her people would reject the changes the bond had created, viewing her as contaminated by alien influence. You're still you, he reassured her.
Just expanded. More capable than you were before.
Through their shared awareness, Kane felt her gratitude and love. The emotions were not romantic in any conventional sense, but rather the deep affection between two beings who had shared consciousness and sacrifice. They had become something new together, something that transcended the limitations of either species alone. The Star Weaver fleet's response to their approach confirmed that the Nixery had not only survived but thrived. Their ships were larger and more advanced than anything in Federation space, incorporating 4 centuries of continuous research and development. Fleet Commander Thane's greeting, when it came, brought tears to Lyraliai's eyes. Little cousin, his voice carried across the communication channel with warmth and wonder. We had hoped but never dared to believe.
Welcome home.
As the Harmony entered the Nixery formation, Kane realized that his choice on Nix Prime had done more than save one individual. It had bridged 2 civilizations, created new possibilities for cooperation, and potentially provided the key to defending the galaxy against threats beyond imagination.
Through their bond, he felt Lyraliai's deep contentment.
She was no longer the last of her kind, and the knowledge her people had preserved would finally be shared with species that could benefit from it. Kane smiled as he watched Nixery ships approaching to welcome them home. He had volunteered for a simple humanitarian mission and somehow become something unprecedented, a bridge between species, a keeper of ancient knowledge, and a guardian against threats that most beings couldn't even imagine.
The future held challenges that neither human nor Nixery could face alone.
But, together, enhanced by bonds that transcended individual existence, they had a chance to build something greater than the sum of their parts. Kane had offered his blood to save a dying vampire princess. In return, she had given him a purpose that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.